All right, so this is the last video and for week 4. I just kind of want to talk about what I see as a sort of practical implications for some of these ideas. I touched on a couple of them, I think, last time in terms of the increasing your corner of the world and making a difference and focus freedom rather than kind of freedom spread out and thinking about all these various things. And I want to expand on that a little bit more. Now, here I'm going to borrow from another friend of mine, Mike Starin, and he has talked about this idea of developing a virtue of properly directed mental energy. In other words, it has to do with harnessing our ability to think about certain ideas or focus on certain things and to harness that ability properly in a good way, in a well directed manner. There's a lot of different things we can consider and think about or reflect on. And I touched on some of that last time, how you can look at the evening news and find 10 different things to think about. And they could be very depressing. They can cause you to feel quite angry. They can cause you to feel very upset. Now, let's get a little bit closer to home. I think in the Catholic Church, it's very easy, for example, to focus on some of what Pope Francis has done and say, well, geez, he's not been clear about some of his teachings. He maybe hasn't done a lot about the abuse issues in the church, or as much as he could have. He's made bad appointments. He has not respected some of the longstanding there are certain traditions in the church. He hasn't been a friend of certain movements in the church, etc. So it's easy to focus on all these stuff and then get animated about it, have intense conversations about it, feel intense emotions about it, think it's really important to form opinions about it, want other people to form opinions about it. And our mental energy is getting really, really focused on that. We're choosing to focus on those things. So I want to kind of dial back for a second. Now, again, we talked earlier about the voluntary, right? Well, the voluntary is something that comes from within us. And the chosen is when we have certain options in front of us and we opt for one in lieu of the others. We deliberate about and opt for one. Now, what my friend Mike has talked about is this concept that we can consider our minds. Maybe this isn't the best model of a mind, but I think it's helpful. We consider our minds as having various sets of ideas. And one of these sets of ideas is what I'll call like the issues in the Catholic Church or issues with Pope Francis. You have this on the one hand. And then on the other hand, you have like problems in the culture. And then over here, let's say there's a third option is possible things I can do today to be kind. Now, these are not mutually exclusive options. And I don't, again, think this is exactly the way our minds work. It's just kind of an analogy. But I think it's a helpful analogy. I'll explain why. Now, last time, in the last video, I talked about our limited amount of energy in general, our limited amount of freedom. Well, there's also a limited amount of mental energy. We don't have an infinite amount that we can just expend whenever we want, however we want. I'm sure you guys get pretty tired watching these videos. They can get boring and get difficult to follow. And you're not always sure what I'm saying. And quite frankly, I'm not always sure what I'm saying. The reason for that is that we have limited mental energy. And that limited mental energy also comes to play when we're thinking about something like what we choose to reflect on, what we choose to think about, what we choose to focus our minds on, what set of ideas we choose to focus our minds on. So insofar as we have a limited mental energy, a limited radar screen of our minds, to use another analogy, only a certain number of things can possibly show up on that. So let's just go with the radar analogy just for a second, because a radar, it only shows certain things passing through on its screen. It only has a limited range of what it senses out in the world. And the radar screen similarly only has a limited scope, and in that limited scope, only a limited number of things become visible. So that's just the condition. That's the given state of our minds. We don't have this awesome, infinite, completely open expanse that just can take in everything and focus on whatever it wants and go from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. No, we have to work with the limited, finite conditions of our mind. And within that limited, finite conditions, just like on the limited, finite radar, only certain things show up. Now, I talked last time about, or the first lecture, about how there was a limited number of options of what I could choose as a means for being healthy. There's things like exercise, diet pills. I think something kind of similar shows up in terms of not just our physical health, but also our mental health. That our mental health can be either fostered or hindered according to the sorts of choices we make in terms of what we choose to think about, what we choose to expend our mental energy on. I'll go back to that example I talked about earlier. I can choose, um, again, option set one was the problems of the church. I can deliberate about and kind of choose that to really focus my energy on. Set two was problems in the culture, political issues, the culture of death, etc. Set three would be how can I exercise kindness to the people around me? The creative, thoughts about, geez, who might be having a rough day, and what could I do for that person, perhaps. Now, I'm going to be pretty frank here. I think the third option is really the only healthy option. It's the only one that fosters mental health. I think the other two hurt mental health. I think they misdirect our energy, and they're almost a waste of it. Because we can't do anything about those situations. They make us often feel angry and upset. Um, they don't put us in, proverbially speaking, a good frame of mind. They don't make us aware of the things around us that are important that we can do something about. Again, increasing our corner of the world, making that difference in our corner of the world. If I'm ranting and raving about the Democrats or the Republicans, I'm probably missing out on being aware of the fact that my friend might need me to call him, or my parents might need me to reach out to them, or this person I live with may be having difficulty in school, and I should try to do something to help him. That limited freedom, or that limited mental energy, means we got to work well with the limitations in front of us. We don't have these infinite resources we can draw from. So it's not as if I can say, oh, geez, I can spend, today just kind of like really getting upset about about Pope Francis, but tomorrow, I'll just I'll draw from another source of energy, mental energy, and focus, and I'll be fine. It's like, well, no, that's not how we work. We have to respond. We have to work with where we're at right now. And like, I couldn't just say, well, and I'm not going to make a choice about exercising. I'll hold off on that choice. Well, you hold off for too long, and eventually you just lose the motivation, you lose the intention, and you don't make the deliberation and the choice, and then the consequent effort toward being healthy. And I think the same would hold true, that eventually we kind of just develop a pattern, may I even say habit, of dialoguing about, getting upset about, focusing our minds on sorts of worldwide problems, problems in the church, problems in the country, etc., that prevent us, or at least hinder us, from developing a more mentally healthy pattern of thinking about good things, creative ways of being kind, things to appreciate. Let's go back to Frankl for a second, or Father Placid, finding one thing every day to be grateful for. I don't think many of us ever do that. Um, I've done it a handful of times. Do I make it a regular habit? No. That's something that I need to get a lot better at. Quite frankly, there's lots of things in my life I can be grateful for. I can often just miss them, or I can complain about things and think, woe is me, and just be upset. But what does that do? Where does that lead me? Well, I feel bad. I lose motivation. I sometimes fall back in terms of other areas of development in life. I'm not pleasant to be around. I'm not as available to help other people. It's a cascading effect here. Like we saw with Frankl, Mandela, it's Father Blessed. They built up from that proper exercise of freedom, from that proper directions of their minds, to be able to have a greater effect on the people around them. I mean, Mandela becoming the first black president of South Africa and doing so in a very peaceful and quite beautiful manner. Frankl becoming a leading psychiatrist in existential psychology. Father Placid coming back, being able to minister and be a priest in these gulag situations. So the mental freedom and it being properly exercised carries out into the world. And the same way, the misuse of that freedom, the expenditure of the freedom in the wrong way, the opting for the wrong things to think about, can have not a building up effect, but a sinking down effect. It brings us down and perhaps even brings the people around us down. The wisest and I would say best man I ever have ever known never talks politics, or he rarely talks politics. I remember when the Iraq War started in 2003. I was a college sophomore. Had a lot of opinions about the war, and I was very free to share those opinions, and I wanted to get other people's opinions. That's what you are when you're 19. It's fine. And anyway, I would talk to Abbot Matthew about this stuff, and his response was more often about a sense of compassion for the people who were in the war, praying for people he personally knew who would be in it, and actually inviting me to pray for someone he knew who was a Marine who would be in the war. And that always had an impact on me, because it reminded me that he was focusing his mental energy on compassion and kindness and love, things that build up and make a impact in the positive way in the world, and not on things that bring down anger, resentment, total frustration, feeling of being victimized, that the world is nutty, that sink down and make a negative impact, kind of draw people down with you. We all know that it's very difficult to be around people who have chosen in their minds to really focus in on topics that make them angry, or that they can do nothing about, or that get people really upset. Um, it just seems to bring down everybody. It doesn't uplift. It doesn't enrich. It doesn't doesn't enliven anything. It's in the end, it's actually quite frankly, it's pretty dull. Um, it's the opposite of creative. And let me say a bit about that. I think that there is a great deal in life that we can actually be fairly creative about. And I don't mean creative as in the sense of creating out of nothing. Creation ex nihilo belongs only to God. I mean being creative with the circumstances and situations where we find ourselves. Um, I'll give a second example of this. I'll give an example of this kind of creativity. Another Benedictine monk I know, Brother Andrew Thornton, telling me about this time that he had spent a sabbatical. He spent a sabbatical semester, I think it was, in China, because he loved to study the Chinese culture and the Chinese language. And anyway, he was at this school there, and at first he was lonely, and he was finding it difficult to adjust to life there. And he told me about a conversation he had with his brother that really motivated him and kind of got him realizing I can do something here now. And he began to just have an awareness about the fact that there were young kids studying there, and they might be more homesick than he was, and they might need, just a friendly face. So he started to bake them cookies, and he started to talk with them about stuff, and it changed his whole attitude toward the thing. And he had a very good sabbatical there. And it was a small thing. You think of baking cookies. What the hell does that mean? Well, depending on how you do it and why you do it, for whom you do it, can mean a lot. It's not about these grand acts of changing the world, as I was talking about last time. It's more about saying, okay, given this set of circumstances, what can I do with it? Now, that was, I think, Brother Andrew is fairly creative. It's like thinking outside the box. It's going beyond saying, okay, well, whatever, I got to deal with these circumstances. Like, no, how can I make this better? How can I actually do something for other people? What would be good for them? Um, you know, I'm trying to think of a second example here. Oh, here's one. I remember when I was in late high school and my senior year of high school, suffering from a lot of depression, honestly, and it was a very difficult time. And my uncles, I think, recognized that in me. And one thing they did that I've always just been very appreciative is they took me down into the Adirondack Mountains for the day and brought me to this place called Lake Meacham, and we went swimming and hiking there. And why do I say that's creative? Well, because oftentimes I think when somebody's feeling depressed, it's easy to just think the best thing to do is talk, and sometimes it is, or to give them maybe books to, which sometimes it is. But this was kind of just trying something different, and it worked, and it really made me feel a lot better, and it's a very good memory I've always had. Um, we think of artists and craftsmen as being very creative people. Van Gogh could paint the color yellow better than anybody else. Michelangelo could look at a block of marble and he could see the David within it, chip away what wasn't the David. Da Vinci could imagine all these various people as characters in the Last Supper and then paint that painting. I think it's interesting to think about, well, what are ways I can be creative here? How can I exercise a similar type of creativity in my everyday life? What are ways I can exercise kindness towards somebody that maybe he would never expect or she would never expect? What are ways I can reach out to somebody who hasn't been reached out to in a long time? And just like an artist is often open to inspiration, I think the the person who's using his freedom creatively and well in his corner of the world is also open to inspiration. I've had this happen several times where, for example, with a holiday, Christmas this past year, I wasn't just focused on, okay, we got to get through the holiday with the family, whatever. It was more so, okay, what might be a good way, something good to do this holiday? What might be some opportunity to be kind or charitable this holiday season? And it became apparent to me that there was somebody from our church that I should invite for Christmas dinner, and I did, and he really enjoyed it, and he was very grateful, and it was a wonderful time. And that was an inspiration that I didn't have any control over yet. It came from it came from somewhere beyond me. Um, but I think I had just made myself available for it because I was willing to think outside the box. I wasn't just, let's go with that expression, actually, there's an actual box here. Uh-huh. Um, a box is closed off, right? There's nothing, it's closed. And if I'm thinking in here, I'm not open to what's out here. That's what I mean about thinking outside the box, getting outside of the usual way of thinking about things, getting outside the usual frame of reference, getting outside our normal pattern of focusing our energy on certain things can actually open us up to a much bigger inspiration that can come in. Nothing comes in when the lid is closed on the box. Only comes in when that lid is open. Similar way, I think nothing comes into our minds when we're kind of closed off and we have a very set way of thinking about things. I had just focused on, okay, I'll get through the holidays. That's the way it is. Whatever, that inspiration never would have come. Again, the inspiration came. It was not me. I did move whatever. It's not okay. It's not about me. Um, but the the key point I'm trying to get here is that we have the opportunity, I think, every day to be creative and artistically creative like a way that is not just available to the craftsmen or people like that. It has to do with how do we choose to relate to the world around us? How do we foster our relationships with people? How do we exercise things like kindness and charity and compassion um, in our own unique way and become open to that inspiration and try it out in new ways. And one author, he talks about giving love in packages that the person would never expect. And metaphorically speaking, but acts of kindness that the person would never realize was an option. And maybe you didn't realize was an option until you had that inspiration and you put it into practice and it's so much for the person. And I've been on both the giving and receiving end of that, and it's incredible. But it comes because we're willing to, again, think outside the box and try something different and use the material that's always there, but we're just not always aware of it. Like that. We'll go back to the example of the David. David's Michelangelo would say that the David was always in the statue of the excuse me, the statue of the David was always in that big piece of marble, always in that chunk of marble. He just had to see it. And once he saw it, he could remove what wasn't there. And I think the same way, like those acts of kindness or compassion, that expression of love is always there. We just have to remove what gets in the way and allow it to come to the surface, allow it to be expressed, allow it to foster, allow it to grow. And that connects back to what I said in the previous video about kind of the creasing the corner of the world and making a difference. Um, when that sense of making a difference becomes paramount and becomes primary in our mental focus and our use of our freedom, I think it won't be long before certain creative options become more available to us. So I talked earlier about how that person's mind had a finite set of things to think about. One was like problems of the Pope, problems with political situation, and you know, opportunities to be kind today to one person. Well, maybe that becomes opportunity. Then we see like there's opportunities to be kind to a second person, third person, opportunities to try something new in a new program at church, or opportunities to reach out to people who have fallen away from the church, or opportunities to um, say mass at different places, or opportunities to expand religious education, or whatever it is. That opens up because we've not chosen to go after and pursue and think about and focus on certain things in our mind that drag us down and don't lift us up. When that becomes, we refrain from that, we break that pattern, when we spend our mental energy properly, it expands. Again, it opens the mind to those creative inspirations, to those greater set of options. You know, the artist who only paints one way is ultimately a sterile artist, and an artist who doesn't really ever grow, and an artist who's sort of a one trick pony, if you will. I mean, look at Picasso. How many periods did Picasso go through? The red period, the blue period, the Guernica period, blah, blah, blah. He was amazing. Um, he was always reinventing his art in a way. I mean, look at Michelangelo. Michelangelo, he was, look what the guy's done. I mean, the Pietà, the David, the Moses, the Sistine Chapel ceiling, the Last Judgment, designing St. Peter's. He reinvents himself. He's always growing in new ways of being creative. And I think the same is called for everybody because we all have freedom. Freedom and responsibility, I said last time, go hand in hand. Well, now I want to say freedom and creativity are also connected. And that artistic creativity is never lost to us insofar as we always have our freedom. And insofar as we exercise that and break out of certain patterns of thinking and open up and think outside the box, then we much increase our capacity to receive an inspiration and to find new ways of exercising kindness and love in the world. And the world is in desperate need of it. I just want to close by talking about, I was sort of berating watching the news. I don't mean that entirely. There are very, very horrible things going on in the world. And I think if it means anything to us that these things are going on, it would mean enough to actually respond to them in a human way. So it's a recognition that the world is in desperate need of love. And where can we exercise that love? Our own corner of the world. So that creasing of the world is ultimately for each of us a creasing of our own individual corner of the world. Doing so in love, for love, and out of love in a free and creative manner will, I think, make all the difference. All right, so that's the end of this set of videos for week 4.